it just seems like there's a lot of meetings and I don't know exactly what we're trying to accomplish with these meetings. And so I changed the rhythm from weekly to monthly. And then the monthly meetings, and so I asked for some feedback, and folks said, yeah, it's actually not enough. We need a little bit more time. And what came as a result of that was sort of, I think there's sort of two components or two purposes to these meetings. There's a sense of community and camaraderie that comes as a result of that. And so we missed that component when we went to more of a once a month thing where it felt almost only focused on business. And so you didn't have the relational component, you only had the outcome component. And how are we doing on our outcomes, which is important, but even the team was feeling a little bit of that out of balance. And so we're going to change that.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer Podcast. I am your co-host, Thomas Vick, joined by my co-host, Seth Wilson. Seth, how's it going today?
Thomas, I'm doing great. It's a lovely fall day out in, central Indiana here. So just so fun to see the leaves changing color and just the refreshing sense of renewal, I guess, that comes from the changing seasons. We don't have beaches here and we don't have mountains. So you got to go with what you got, I guess, in Indiana.
That's right. The tree in my front yard is a lovely red maple right now. So I love to see the changing of the colors in the fall and the crisp fall air. It's wonderful. Maybe a little bit overcast the last couple of days, but it's been nice to have a change in the weather.
It's fun, and like I said, that's the one thing Indiana does bring to the table is the four seasons. Although we often skip fall and go straight to winter, and often skip spring and go straight to summer. So we'll take it while we've got it. But it got me thinking. We've been talking quite a bit over the past several weeks about getting prepared for, maybe you're wanting to launch a law firm or in a smaller firm and you've got ideas and those kind of things. And so came across an article on the Indiana Lawyer's website, and the Indiana Lawyer is a industry newspaper, for lack of a better description, that's based in Indianapolis but covers statewide news. And one of the articles they had posted recently was called "Smaller Firms Can Be Best Fit for Some New Attorneys." And we can post a link to that in the show notes, but just kind of highlighting a couple of things that folks who are newer to the practice may be considering. And so I thought it might be good to talk about that from that standpoint of like, what are the options highlighted in the article for lawyers who are kind of getting ready to start out? And then I want to also talk about it from the perspective of, as a small firm owner, like what were some of the things we drew out of the article?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I can kind of just start off with my experience. I graduated in 2014 from law school, and at that time, law firms were still kind of trying to pull themselves out of the 2008 recession, and there weren't a ton of jobs available. And my rationales for opening my own practice was I could spend all this time submitting applications to big law firms and I don't really have a connection with them. One of the things that was said to me was you're probably not going to have a lot of contact with clients, and you're not going to have a ton of contact with a partner that you work for to get the kind of value or the kind of feedback from the partner that you otherwise might want to have. So that was kind of my thinking in starting my own practice. Like, big law isn't going to necessarily be everything that you want it to be. And there are, maybe some things on the work-life balance scale that might tip its hand towards working for a small firm. So from my perspective, I kind of wanted to go with a small firm or start my own practice coming out of law school. Yeah, but I think it's great that the Indiana Lawyer is highlighting how smaller firms can be a better fit for some new attorneys. And kind of like what I was saying, you get so much more opportunity potentially in a smaller firm setting than in a large law firm setting. I think that's one thing that we could talk about is just the experience that people can have associate attorneys can have in a small law.
Yeah, it's a good point because there's sort of a balance to figuring out the level of interaction that you're going to have with clients, the level of mentoring or support that you're going to have from the partner, because we've talked about on the podcast before, when you're trying to make a hiring decision as a law firm owner, what is that caseload or level at which you can afford to bring somebody in, but you're still managing an active caseload? And how much time do you have to mentor and grow the attorney that comes in? So there's all these different variables that kind of go into the calculation. So I think if you're evaluating as an attorney looking at opportunities, that's one of the things to really pay attention to is, what comfort level would you have being fully autonomous, so to speak, in terms of the practice, and just having somebody hand you a file and saying, go figure it out, versus somebody actually walking you step by step through the process. And somewhere on that sort of continuum is where your comfort level is going to reside. And that's never going to be a perfect calculation. There's going to be times when seasons are busier than others and the partner, so to speak, just for using that partner and associate kind of model, isn't available to provide all the mentoring that you may need or think you need at that point. And maybe that's the partner's methodology, right? Like, here you go, let me see what you can do with it. I know it's sort of a low risk scenario and it'll be okay if you don't do everything that I would have done in that case or what have you. But so that, I think, is a really important sort of assessment that you can make as a newer attorney, or looking at the legal options of what really fits your personality. How do you best work? What environment is good for you? And I think one of the things the article highlighted was sort of the difference between a more populated area and a less populated area, because legal services are provided to people oftentimes. And so if you're in a lower population area, there may not be as much work or sufficient work to support a full-time practice. And so what does that look like? And one of my thoughts over time is like, how could we, being in more of a county seat area, can we reach out to counties around us to provide services there, but we may not be able to be there full time because there may just not be enough work there. Again, kind of having those sort of discussions and thoughts long term is kind of a helpful thing. But from that perspective of the newer attorney, kind of looking at the options, that's one thing I think is really important.
Yeah, and it's something that the Indiana Supreme Court, talking about our own home state of Indiana, the Indiana Supreme Court has highlighted how there's a shortage, an attorney shortage, particularly in the rural counties across the state of Indiana. We've got a ton of attorneys that are in the Indianapolis area, the north side of Indianapolis where you are, or the south side, or Marion County itself, where the city of Indianapolis is, and all the kind of surrounding counties around that area. But as you get further out from the big cities, you get fewer and fewer attorneys, and there may be opportunity there. With an attorney shortage, it might be a great option for a young attorney coming out of law school to get on board with, maybe an established practice that is in a smaller town that can handle, that has the workload currently for the folks that are in that area, to get some experience and to really make an impact on that community. But Indiana Supreme Court is highlighting it for a reason. Understand that there is a need for more attorneys to go out into the rural counties, and that would be a way to get started in your law practice.
Yeah, and honestly, that could be a little overwhelming, thinking about, okay, I don't really have much experience and or training in this. I have my legal education, but what do I do when that first client walks in the door? And that's, I think, highlights the importance of having a network or some type of mentoring relationship established as you're looking at doing your own thing, so that you can connect with someone who's maybe been doing things a little bit longer and they can share what they've learned across their time. Yeah, even if it's not in a firm context. And I think that is some of the value that you can have by going into a firm, be that a big firm or a smaller firm, getting that training of, okay, how do I take all these things that I learned in law school and actually apply them to the day-to-day needs of legal needs of the people I'm serving. And I think there's a lot of me that goes, boy, kind of forgot how much I had to learn coming out of law school and to be ready. I do remember distinctly the feeling I had when I was signing my first appearance on behalf of a client and the responsibility. It was like, wow, I'm representing this person in a lawsuit. This is a big deal and a big responsibility. And now I think of an appearance like, oh, just get the appearance on file. You know, we gotta do. But that was sort of the first big document that I had put my name on as an attorney with the full license number and all that stuff. And it was like, boy, this is the start of that journey. And it's really having all of that background and going, okay, thinking about, boy, I've got to start this on my own and not have any resource. Like I say, it can be a bit overwhelming. So I think would be really good if you're planning on doing that, going out on your own, setting up shop in maybe your hometown, which happens to be a smaller community, making sure that you have that network of attorneys around you that you can reach out to, ask questions of either the local bar association or something like that to get you connected.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is mentioned in the article is getting an internship or a clerkship with a law firm after your 2L year so that you can get that experience in a law firm. Think about in the rural areas, if you could get an internship or clerkship at a rural law firm, you're probably going to get significant work to handle, and you're going to get that experience so that after you graduate from law school and you pass the bar, you can step in and really be a meaningful contributor to the work there in the small law office in a rural community. And I think you can provide more value to that community by having that background of a summer or two working with that law firm. So I would encourage people to look at that as an option, is just see if you can find a rural law firm and see if you can help them out.
Yeah, and encouragement to those smaller law firm owners to be thinking ahead and providing for that. You know, we're heading into this fall winter season and you need to be thinking about next summer and when kids are going to be, I call them kids, they're young adults, I suppose, but yeah, they're coming out of law school, coming out of their 1L year, coming out of their 2L year, and they're going to be looking for those opportunities. And so if you can connect with the schools to say, hey, yeah, we're thinking about this process and figure out how can you get down to the schools to interview or set up those conversations to potentially find candidates, start prepping your budget now so that there's some funds available for that internship potentially, right? Because that can be an incentive to bring somebody in if they know they're going to get paid for it. You're starting to develop that pipeline down the road. And I think the first time you do it's probably going to be a little more difficult because you've never done it before, right? You don't know what to do. But the second time and the third time then kind of builds on that and it models the larger firm context where they have summer associates and summer recruiting and all the different things that they're trying to get folks into their building, so to speak, and into their firm. And we do it on a little bit smaller scale when you're smaller. But thinking ahead, now is a good time to start planning for that as you wrap up this year and start thinking about what's going to happen next year.
Absolutely. That's something that I haven't done yet in my practice. I have not had an internship or a clerkship that I've offered to any law school student or even an undergrad who's looking for similar type work. I haven't done that, but I think that may be something that I even consider in the future to give somebody experience, but also there are things in the office that I need help with, to try to get the work done. So it can be a win-win for everybody. It's something that I probably should consider myself.
Yeah, and that's what's great about these articles and these discussions is you start thinking about possibilities that, oh, maybe I could do that, or I don't see a way to do that until I read this and I saw somebody else who had that experience. And we did, we've done internships before, but we had a law clerk here this past summer, and it was a great experience for us. Really was nice. It was really nice to be able to draw on the recent knowledge and education and training that lawyers are, prospective lawyers are getting, and even the tool sets like the just the integration of artificial intelligence into the legal research world and those kind of things, and how law is being taught and understood now versus what it was when we were there, which wasn't too long ago, but was long enough that there's been some pretty substantial change. And so that fresh perspective is good. The benefit to the young person coming out and getting that education, hopefully you're helping along the way with their education, whether they stay with your firm or go somewhere else. It's kind of a good, like you say, win-win for the legal profession as a whole.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a good discussion. Again, we're kind of discussing the article entitled Smaller Firms Can Be Best Fit for Some New Attorneys by the Indiana Lawyer, which was published on October 22nd, 2025. So I encourage people to take a look at that and kind of, listen to this podcast, but then take a look at that article to see what was said in that piece. Kind of shifting topics here. We were kind of talking before we got started with the podcast about how to manage, meetings and roles and responsibilities among team members. As, a law firm is growing, the team grows and the responsibilities shift. Some of the routines that you had previously may end up shifting and changing or just looking a little bit different than they did in the past. And I guess I want to turn the conversation over to you a little bit, Seth, and just ask you, what gives you the sense for when you need to change a particular role or responsibility, or maybe even a team meeting that you regularly have? What prompts you to kind of change what your routine is with your team?
A lot of time it's sort of a gut feel. You get that sense that something isn't working as smoothly as you think it should, or you have some level of dissatisfaction with, I don't like this, or I had a different vision for this and it's not quite meeting that expectation. And then it becomes that self-reflection of, why isn't it? What are the issues? Where have I dropped the ball? Where could I be better? And then you start looking at the variables that you kind of identify. And so that's sort of the first thing, is like, if my frustration level has increased a little bit, or my stress level has increased, and I'm thinking this just isn't working the way I think it should work or could work. And then I want to always test that gut feel against data and make sure, to the extent I can, that I'm getting some more objective data to back up my thoughts. So if it's a process that I think is taking too long, like, where is that? Let's really go through and figure it out and make sure that we've done the best we can to make that as clean a process as we can, right? And same things apply to meetings. So a meeting needs to be effective, but what's the purpose of the meeting? Is it, in our world, we typically had held weekly team meetings, and we'd bring everybody who was able into a meeting and go through an agenda and walk through that process. And midway through the year, I kind of was feeling like it just seems like there's a lot of meetings and I don't know exactly what we're trying to accomplish with these meetings. And so I changed the rhythm from weekly to monthly. And then the monthly meeting happened a few times. And so I asked for some feedback, and folks said, yeah, it's actually not enough. We need a little bit more time. And what came as a result of that was sort of, I think there's sort of two components or two purposes to these meetings. One, there's a sense of community and camaraderie that comes as a result of that. And so we missed that component when we went to more of a once a month thing, where it felt almost only focused on business and outcomes. And so you didn't have the relational component, you only had the outcome component. And how are we doing on our outcomes, which is important. You got to know those. But even the team was feeling a little bit of that out of balance. And so we're going to change that. And again, that's because of direct feedback, people being willing to speak into the process and say, hey, frankly, I was kind of surprised. I never thought people would ask for more meetings. You learn by asking questions and not having everything all figured out. And so I think the big thing for me was, let's get the purpose more clearly identified. So I know one meeting is going to focus more on the relational aspect. I don't know exactly strategically how we're going to set that up yet, but the other one will be more on the how are we doing on our goals and outcomes. And I think strengthening those bonds on both sides help us get to that out.
Yeah, I fully agree. And that has been my experience as well, that there is a relational component to team meetings and there is the outcome component, the outcome focus to meetings. So, and you need to be aware of both. In my experience, when we hired an associate attorney, my paralegal and I would be meeting with him. And I kind of felt like these weekly meetings are good, but some of these conversations that I'm having, for instance, with my paralegal, don't have anything to do with the work that I've assigned to my associate attorney. And um, I'm kind of wasting his time for, 25, 30 minutes of the meeting because I'm talking about matters that are unrelated to his assignments. And so that's value. You think about it from an hourly rate standpoint. This is a very valuable, kind of expensive amount of time that you're spending together. And if it's not being used effectively, it's really kind of wasting money, because time is money in a lot of ways. So I suggested that we change to every 2 weeks, and they were like, well, that's probably not enough. Kind of the same experience that you had. The law firm has grown a little bit more since then, and we're going to be, I'm going to meet individually with team members in their particular practice areas on a regular basis, so that we're kind of separating our team meetings out a little bit and not occupying so much dead time on individuals just sitting in the meeting, not having anything to say or respond to. But I think you got to be aware of it. You just have to be aware of, is this the most effective way of doing it? And kind of, I agree, it's kind of a gut feeling. This isn't the best thing to do. Let's try something different and see if it works out better. You adjust and try to make it better in the future. There's no guarantee that the change is going to be the optimal thing for your law firm. You might need to make more changes in the future, but we're just trying to get better and better.
Yeah. And that's why it's a practice, right? We've never arrived. The practice has never changed from a practice. We're still going through it every single day. The firm doesn't graduate from a practice to a completion. It's still a practice. And so I think the feedback, the communication is really important as you grow and as you go through different seasons of the practice. And so when you're at a different stage, you may need more meetings because you're trying to do a bigger project that involves everybody in the office. Or you may want to have everybody together just for that camaraderie sake and building those relationships and trying to keep everybody on the same page as to, hey, this is who we are. This is our culture. This is how we want to serve clients. And those things take effort and time, and they take more effort and time the more people that you have involved. And if it's just you know what the culture is, right? That's pretty easy. If you add in a teammate, all of a sudden now you've got to help educate there, but it's probably a little easier because there's direct observation. Now, third person, fourth person, as that grows, it gets a little bit more challenging to maintain that culture that you want. And so I think having those open lines of communication, of seeking out the feedback, even though you may not be comfortable with the answers that you get sometimes. And it may force you to go back and go, okay, well, then I need to really rethink this, because if I'm still feeling the stress or the dissatisfaction or whatever it is with that outcome, so was somebody else. And what does that mean? And how do I alleviate that and lead well through it and make sure that we're reaching the outcomes we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, and while we're talking about meetings, I'll just say there's a purpose for every meeting. You don't have meetings just for meeting's sake. You've got to have a purpose behind it. And I started having what I call weekly game plan meetings because there were questions that came up on a regular basis. And it's kind of like email. If you're always responding to email, as soon as the email pops into your inbox, you're going to lose efficiency and it's not a good time management behavior. Same is true with questions from your team members, your staff, and your associate attorneys and things like that. It's it's a time management issue. You need to address all questions that you can in a condensed time slot so that you can answer them and everybody else can move on and start making progress after those questions have been answered. And that's what's kind of really important to me is let's, if we can wait to have questions answered until our weekly meeting, let's do that so that we can spend time on other things prior to that meeting.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Thomas, because the meeting that just happens to happen and doesn't help us advance the cause or advance a purpose is everybody's going to see through that as what it is, a waste of time. And so you've sort of not only not invested well in using the time, but then you've demotivated everybody who has to come to a meeting that they don't know the purpose of or why we're doing it. And so that investment of time has to give you a return on that investment. And I think that's what I'm always wrestling with is what is that return and making sure that we're trying to maximize that to the best we can.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that there's a whole lot more that we could talk about when it comes to roles, responsibilities, meetings, decisions in leadership in a law firm, and we're going to continue that discussion in later episodes, I'm sure. But for now, let's kind of pause here and wait until the next episode. Seth, what's the best place that people can find us?
Well, it's a great cliffhanger right there. It's like a to be continued at the end. We'll catch up on this next
Dun,
week.
dun,
Well
dun.
done. Well, the best place to find us is at YouTube and looking up our channel Lifetime Legacy Lawyers. We're also available wherever you get your audio podcasts as well. And we hope you'll post a comment out there and we'll be able to help answer those questions on future episodes. Thomas, thanks so much for the time today, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Seth.